my name is Richard Bennett, and the day my own son tried to take everything I had spent, 43 years earning, was the day I finally understood something that no father ever wants to believe. Children don't always become strangers overnight, sometimes they become strangers one favor at a time. My son didn't just want a loan, he demanded my entire retirement fund to fuel his lifestyle, thinking I was backed into a corner. He was already celebrating his victory until I revealed the one thing he didn't account for, my secret offshore assets. Watch how his greed walked him straight into a legal trap that cost him every cent of his inheritance. If someone had told me 20 years earlier that those words would one day describe my life, I would have laughed them out of the room. Back then, Daniel was still the little boy who insisted on holding my hand every time we crossed the street. He used to tell everyone that when he grew up, he wanted to be exactly like his dad. Every Father's Day, he'd scribble crooked letters onto homemade cards that I kept tucked away in an old cedar box upstairs. I still have those cards. Sometimes I wonder if he ever meant a single word. The first warning signs didn't arrive with shouting or threats, they came disguised as small requests. Dad, can you help me cover rent this month? It'll only be temporary, I'll pay you back. At first, I believed him because that's what fathers do. You don't calculate interest. When your child is struggling, you simply reach into your pocket. The first loan was $5,000, the second was $12,000, then came another $15,000 to help him launch a business. Business never existed beyond a polished website and expensive office furniture. Every excuse sounded believable because Daniel had mastered something few people ever know. He never lied completely, he wrapped every lie around a tiny piece of truth. Yes, he'd met investors. No, they hadn't signed anything. Yes, he was working on a project. No, it wasn't producing a single dollar. By the time I realized what was happening, nearly a quarter of my savings had quietly disappeared into the black hole of his ambition. My late wife, Eleanor, saw it long before I did. She used to stand beside the kitchen window with a cup of tea and watch Daniel drive away in another luxury SUV he couldn't afford. "You're rescuing him from consequences," she told me one evening. "I'm helping my son." "No," she answered softly. "You're teaching him that you'll always pay the bill." I hated hearing that because somewhere deep inside, I knew she was right. Eleanor had an extraordinary ability to see people exactly as they were, not as she wished they could be. Maybe that's why Daniel rarely visited when she was alive. She asked uncomfortable questions, questions like, "Why are you spending $6,000 a month on restaurants when you're borrowing money from your father?" Questions like, "If your company is doing so well, why are creditors calling your house?" Daniel always laughed them off. "Mom worries too much." He'd wink at me as though we shared some private understanding. I usually smiled back. Looking back now, I wasn't smiling because I agreed with him. I was smiling because I wanted peace. Peace is expensive. Sometimes it costs your dignity, sometimes it costs your family. When Eleanor passed away after her battle with cancer, the silence inside my home became unbearable. Daniel noticed, not because he missed his mother, because he noticed I was alone. Lonely people are easier to persuade. He began visiting every Sunday. He brought expensive wine. He grilled steaks in my backyard. He talked about grandchildren I barely saw. For a while, I believed we were rebuilding something. Then the requests returned. "Dad, I'm between investments. Dad, the market crashed. Dad, this opportunity only comes once." Each sentence ended the same way, "I just need a little help." One afternoon, while helping my neighbor Margaret replace a broken fence panel, she casually asked, "How's Daniel doing?" I shrugged. "Busy." She hesitated before speaking again. "I saw him downtown." "So, he was driving a Ferrari." I laughed. "That can't be right." It was. Margaret looked genuinely uncomfortable. "He parked outside a private club." The image stayed with me all evening. A Ferrari. 3 days earlier, he'd borrowed another $20,000 because he claimed payroll checks were about to bounce. That night I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop. For the first time in years, I searched for Daniel's company. Instead of success stories, I found lawsuits, unpaid contractors, outstanding tax liens, business partners accusing him of fraud. My stomach tightened, not because of the money, because he'd looked me straight in the eyes while telling me everything was under control. The next Sunday, I asked him about it. He didn't panic, he smiled. "Dad, you know how competitors are, so the lawsuits are fake. They're exaggerated. And the tax liens?" He waved dismissively. "Paperwork." I wanted to believe him, again, but something had changed. His confidence no longer reassured me, it unsettled me, it felt rehearsed. Like he'd answered these questions dozens of times before. Then I noticed something even stranger. His wife, Claire, barely spoke during dinner. She usually dominated every conversation. That evening she kept staring at her plate. When Daniel stepped outside to answer a phone call, she finally whispered, "You need to stop giving him money." I looked at her stunned. "What?" "You heard me." Her voice trembled. "He won't stop until there's nothing left." Before I could ask another question, Daniel walked back inside. Claire instantly forced a smile. The conversation vanished as quickly as it had appeared. But her words echoed in my mind. "He won't stop until there's nothing left." Over the following months, Daniel became more impatient. The polite requests disappeared. Now he called daily. "Dad, did you transfer it? I'll need another week." "A week?" His tone sharpened. "I have people depending on me." "So do I." "You don't understand." "No," I replied quietly. "I don't think I do." He hung up without saying goodbye. It was the first time he'd ever ended a conversation that way. A week later, he appeared unannounced. No smile, no wine, no grandchildren. He walked straight into my living room carrying a leather folder. "We need to talk." Something about those 4 words chilled me. He didn't sit, he stood over me like a businessman preparing a presentation. "I've done the math." "The math?" "You've got enough saved." "For retirement." He nodded impatiently. "Exactly." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "I need all of it." The room fell completely silent. Every clock in the house seemed to stop ticking. "I beg your pardon?" "My investors need proof of liquidity." "You want a loan?" "No." His expression remained cold. "I need access to your entire retirement account." I searched his face for even a hint of embarrassment. There was none, only expectation, as if he were asking to borrow my lawnmower instead of everything I'd worked a lifetime to build. I slowly stood, meeting his eyes. "Daniel, that money is how I survive." He folded his arms. "You'll get it back." "When?" "As soon as the expansion closes." "You said that 3 years ago." His jaw tightened. "So you don't trust me?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Not because I doubted him, because he genuinely believed I was the one betraying him, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My son no longer saw my retirement savings as my future. In his mind, it was already his, I just hadn't handed it over yet. I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I walked past him and looked out the living room window. The maple tree Eleanor and I had planted on our 10th anniversary, swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Every autumn its leaves turned a brilliant crimson, and every year she insisted on raking them into one giant pile, laughing like a little girl before jumping into them. That tree had witnessed almost our entire marriage. Now it was watching my son try to strip away the future we had sacrificed to build. "I asked you a question, Dad." His voice pulled me back. "I heard you." "So?" I turned slowly. "So the answer is no." His expression froze, not hurt, not disappointed, annoyed, like a customer who had been told his favorite restaurant had run out of steak. "No, no, you didn't even think about it." "I've been thinking about it for nearly 10 years. He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means every loan, every promise, every excuse. I've been adding them together for a long time." His shoulders stiffened. "I always intended to pay you back." "I know, I mean it." "I know." He frowned. "You don't sound like you believe me, because intention isn't the same thing as action." For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then he laughed. It wasn't genuine laughter, it was the kind people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're still in control. "You've changed." "I have." "Mom wouldn't have wanted this." The words hit like a slap. For a heartbeat, grief threatened to overwhelm me, then anger quietly replaced it. "Don't use your mother." "I wasn't." "Don't." He looked away for the first time since entering my house. That single reaction told me everything. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had reached for the one weapon he believed would always work: guilt. When guilt failed, something darker appeared behind his eyes. "You know," he said carefully, "this money is going to become mine eventually." I stared at him. "What did you just say?" "It's just reality. No, it is, he shrugged. You're 72, the room suddenly felt colder. Everyone gets old, I'm aware. So why let your savings sit there? They aren't sitting there, they're waiting. For me. He sighed dramatically, as though I were the unreasonable one. You can't take it with you. I also don't have to give it away while I'm still breathing. His jaw clenched. You've become selfish. The irony was almost unbearable. Selfish, after 4 decades of working overtime, after missing birthdays because I was on construction sites, after sacrificing vacations so Daniel could attend private schools, after paying for a university education he never finished. Now I was selfish because I wanted enough money to keep the lights on for the rest of my life. He gathered his folder from the coffee table. I didn't want this conversation to go this way, neither did I. There are other options. What options? He smiled faintly. The legal kind. Every instinct inside me sharpened. What does that mean? It means you've made poor financial decisions. I beg your pardon. I've spoken with professionals. Professionals. He nodded. They believe you may no longer be capable of managing your finances responsibly. For a moment I simply stared at him, then I laughed, a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You think I'm mentally incompetent? I didn't say that. You just implied it. I'm worried about you. No, I stepped closer. You're worried about my bank account. His face hardened. You've become paranoid since Mom died. I've become observant. He opened the leather folder. Inside were neatly organized documents, legal forms, medical evaluations, financial statements. Most of them had yellow sticky notes attached. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. When you've spent years supervising construction crews, you learn something important. The angrier the other person becomes, the calmer you need to be. He slid one document toward me. If you voluntarily transfer authority, this becomes easy. I didn't touch the paper. And if I don't? He hesitated, then he answered. We petition the court. Those 4 words echoed through the room. Petition the court, not because he believed I needed protection, because he believed the law could force me to surrender. You've already hired lawyers. It's just preparation. So this wasn't a conversation, it was no. I shook my head. It was an ultimatum. He didn't deny it. Instead, he tucked the papers back into the folder. You've got 1 week. For what? To reconsider, and if I don't, I'll let the attorneys handle it. Without another word, he walked to the front door. His hand rested on the knob before he spoke again. You'll thank me someday. The door closed behind him. I stood motionless for nearly 5 minutes. The silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. Not because of the threat, because I had just watched my own son prepare to use the legal system against me. I wasn't grieving the money anymore. I was grieving the father I thought I'd been. That evening I drove to the cemetery. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the hills, casting long shadows across the rows of granite headstones. I stopped in front of Eleanor's grave. Fresh flowers still rested there from the week before. I knelt slowly. You warned me. The words caught in my throat. I should have listened. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. For years, this had been the only place where my thoughts felt completely honest. I kept believing he'd grow out of it. My voice cracked. I thought one more chance would fix everything. Tears blurred the lettering on her headstone. You saw what I refused to see. I sat there until darkness settled over the cemetery. For the first time since her death, I didn't feel alone. I felt accountable, and strangely, resolved. Monday morning brought another surprise. There was a certified envelope waiting in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a prestigious law firm downtown. I carried it inside without opening it. Made coffee, fed the birds outside the kitchen window. Watered Eleanor's orchids. Only then did I sit at the dining table. The letter was exactly what I'd expected. A formal notice requesting financial disclosure, a statement questioning my capacity to manage significant assets, an invitation to cooperate before further legal action became necessary. It was carefully written, professional, polite, every sentence sounded reasonable, until you realized it was built on lies. Attached to the notice was something that made my stomach tighten, a signed statement from Daniel. He claimed I had become forgetful, that I regularly misplaced bills, that I had nearly sent large payments to scammers, that neighbors had expressed concern about my mental condition. I read the page twice. None of it was true. Not one sentence, yet seeing my own son sign his name beneath those accusations hurt more than I could describe. It wasn't just a legal strategy, it was character assassination. He wasn't trying to borrow my money anymore. He was trying to convince the world I didn't deserve to control it. I folded the papers carefully instead of tearing them apart. Anger creates mistakes, evidence creates victories. I placed every document into a brand new folder. Then I wrote 2 words across the front, with a black marker, Daniel. That was the moment everything changed. Until then, I had been reacting. From that morning forward, I would start preparing, because if my son wanted to make this a legal battle, he had made one fatal mistake. He believed he knew every account I owned, every dollar I had, and every move I could make. He didn't know that years earlier, after Eleanor received her cancer diagnosis, we had quietly made decisions that no one, not even our own son, had ever been told about, and buried inside those decisions was a secret powerful enough to bring his entire plan crashing down. For the first time, since Daniel had walked into my house, with lawyer's papers tucked under his arm, I wasn't thinking like a father, I was thinking like the man I had been long before he was born. People often assumed I had spent my life simply running a construction company. What they never understood was that construction isn't just about pouring concrete or raising steel. It's about anticipating failure before anyone else sees it. Every blueprint hides weak points. Every project has someone looking for shortcuts. If you survive in that business for 40 years, you develop one habit above all others. You never reveal every contingency plan. That habit had saved my company more than once. I prayed it would save my future now. I carried the folder labeled Daniel upstairs to the study Eleanor used to call my bunker. It wasn't much to look at. Oak bookshelves, an old leather chair, and a roll-top desk scarred with decades of use, but every important decision of my adult life had been made inside those 4 walls. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside sat another folder. Brown, unmarked. I hadn't opened it in almost 8 years. Dust clung to the edges as I lifted it onto the desk. My fingers hesitated over the clasp. The moment I opened it, Eleanor's handwriting greeted me from the very first page. Richard, if we're reading these papers, it means something has gone terribly wrong. Or we've simply become old enough to forget where we hid them. I smiled despite myself. Even legal documents couldn't escape her sense of humor. Beneath the note lay copies of international banking records, trust agreements, investment statements, and letters from financial advisors in 2 different countries. Most people who knew me believed my retirement savings sat entirely inside 3 domestic accounts. That belief had been intentional. Years earlier, after Eleanor's diagnosis, we'd met with an estate attorney named Charles Whitmore. His advice had changed everything. Never confuse privacy with secrecy, Charles had said. Privacy protects honest people. At the time, I hadn't fully understood what he meant. Then he explained. When someone knows exactly what you own, they also know exactly what they can take. Eleanor squeezed my hand beneath the conference table. We've worked too hard to leave Richard vulnerable. Charles nodded. Then don't. That single meeting led to months of careful planning, perfectly legal, carefully documented, completely confidential. A portion of our investments had been transferred into an international asset protection structure under strict legal guidance. Taxes were reported. Regulations were followed. Every document complied with the law. The purpose had never been to hide money, it had been to shield it from unforeseen risks. Back then, the risk we feared was medical bankruptcy. We never imagined the greater danger would come from our own family. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the paperwork. Daniel believed my domestic retirement accounts represented my entire financial life. They didn't, not even close. If he somehow succeeded in freezing those accounts, he still wouldn't control everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. The phone rang downstairs. I closed the folder immediately. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Mr. Bennett? Speaking. My name is Laura Simmons. I'm calling from Whitmore and Ellis. Charles, for a split second I forgot, he had retired 3 years earlier. Laura continued gently. Mr. Whitmore asked me to contact all long-term clients before he left the practice. I've reviewed your file. I listened carefully. Is everything all right? I noticed legal inquiries regarding your domestic accounts. A chill ran through me. How did you know that? Our office receives notifications whenever certain legal filings reference estate structures we've established. I hadn't expected that. I see. There was a brief pause. Would you like to schedule a consultation? Yes, as soon as possible. We have an opening tomorrow morning. I'll be there. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Someone else now knew Daniel had started legal proceedings. Good. That meant I wouldn't be fighting alone. Whitmore and Ellis occupied the top floor of an understated brick building overlooking the river. No marble columns, no gold lettering, just quiet confidence. Laura Simmons greeted me herself. She appeared to be in her early 40s, composed without seeming cold. Her handshake was firm. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I. She led me into a conference room where several familiar files already rested neatly on the table. I spent most of last night reviewing your family's estate planning. She slid one document toward me. Charles left unusually detailed notes. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him. It does. She opened another folder. Tell me exactly what's happening. For nearly an hour I explained everything, the loans, the manipulation, the accusations about my mental health, the certified letter, the threats. She interrupted only to clarify dates and amounts. When I finished, she closed her notebook. Mr. Bennett? Richard. Her expression became serious. Your son has made a significant strategic mistake. What kind? He's assuming disclosure equals ownership. I frowned. I don't follow. He's targeting the assets he knows exist, and he has no legal authority over assets he doesn't know about. A slow realization spread across my face. So the offshore investments remain untouched. Correct. She folded her hands. But there's something far more important. What? If this proceeds to court, his sworn statements become evidence. Yes. If those statements are knowingly false. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Al's statements carried consequences. Serious ones. For the first time, I understood Daniel's confidence might become his greatest weakness. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. What do you want? I heard you contacted a lawyer. Interesting. How had he heard that so quickly? I'm allowed legal advice. I thought we could settle this privately. I almost laughed. You sent attorneys to my house. Only because you're being difficult. No. I stopped walking. I'm protecting myself. Silence. Then he spoke more softly. I don't want this to get ugly. It already has. You still have time for, what? Sign the authority forms. No. His patience snapped. You don't understand what's coming. I think I do. No, you don't. His breathing became heavier. The court will appoint people to evaluate you. I'll cooperate. They'll examine your finances. I have nothing to hide. They'll interview neighbors. Good. He hesitated. That answer clearly wasn't the one he'd expected. You sound awfully confident. I've lived an honest life. You think honesty wins lawsuits? No. I looked across the river at the city's skyline. I think truth survives them. He hung up. This time, it was his silence, not mine, that lingered. When I returned home, Margaret was trimming roses near the property line. She looked up. Everything okay? I forced a smile. It will be. She studied my face for a moment. You know, Claire came by yesterday. I stopped Claire? Margaret nodded. She asked whether I'd noticed memory problems. My heartbeat slowed. What did you tell her? The truth. And what was that? She planted the shears into the soil. I told her you're the sharpest 72-year-old I've ever met. A lump formed in my throat. Thank you. She shrugged. Then she asked something strange. What? She wanted to know whether you'd ever mentioned hidden investments. Every muscle in my body went still. I kept my expression neutral. What did you say? I laughed. Margaret smiled. I told her if you had hidden money, you certainly wouldn't tell the nosy woman next door. Despite everything, I chuckled. Then the smile faded. Daniel wasn't just trying to seize my known accounts anymore. He was fishing. Guessing. Searching for something he couldn't quite prove existed. Which meant one thing. Somewhere, somehow. He had begun to suspect that the money he could see wasn't the whole story. And desperate people rarely become more careful. They become reckless. I had spent 10 years watching my son believe. He was always the smartest man in every room. Now, for the first time in his life, he was chasing a secret he couldn't find. and I intended to make sure that search would lead him exactly where I wanted him to go. The following Monday began with rain. Not the violent kind that rattles windows, but the slow, steady drizzle that seemed determined to wash the color out of everything. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee, watching droplets slide down the glass while Eleanor's old jazz records played softly in the background. For years, mornings had been predictable. Coffee, the newspaper, a walk through the garden, a quiet phone call with Margaret over the fence, if one of us spotted a stubborn rabbit eating the tomatoes. Now every sound made me glance toward the driveway. Every unfamiliar car felt like the beginning of another attack. At exactly 9:17, the doorbell rang. Two people stood on my porch, a middle-aged woman in a navy blazer and a younger man carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Richard Bennett?" the woman asked politely. "Yes," she offered a professional smile. "My name is Susan Keller. This is Michael Ortiz. We've been appointed to conduct a preliminary wellness assessment." I had expected this, just not so quickly. "I assume this concerns the petition filed by my son." Susan nodded. "I'm afraid it does. Please come in." Neither of them seemed eager to be there. They walked through the house slowly, making observations without appearing intrusive. Michael asked practical questions. "What day is today?" "Wednesday." "Who's the current president?" I answered without hesitation. Susan looked around the kitchen. "You live here alone?" "I do." "Do you prepare your own meals?" "Every day." She opened the refrigerator. Not searching for evidence, but confirming I had fresh groceries, medication arranged correctly, and food that hadn't spoiled. They weren't trying to trap me, they were simply doing their jobs. That realization calmed me. After 30 minutes, Susan closed her notebook. "Would you mind if we spoke with a few neighbors?" "Not at all." She smiled. "Thank you for your cooperation." As they stepped outside, Margaret happened to be walking toward her mailbox. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. I didn't try to listen. If my character depended on eavesdropping, I'd already lost. Instead, I watered Eleanor's orchids in the kitchen. 15 minutes later, Susan knocked again before leaving. "Mr. Bennett?" "Yes?" "I can't discuss our report." "I understand. But I appreciate your courtesy." There was something reassuring in the way she said it. Professional, respectful, nothing like the helpless old man Daniel had tried to describe. That afternoon my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Richard Bennett?" "Speaking. My name is Eric Dawson." The name meant nothing. "I'm with Hamilton Private Bank." I frowned. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "No." There was a slight pause. "But someone has." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "We've received inquiries regarding accounts that appear to be associated with your name." My pulse slowed instantly. Not fear. Calculation. "What kind of inquiries?" "The caller claimed to be acting on your behalf." "I authorized no one." "I suspected as much." Eric lowered his voice. "Our verification procedures prevented any disclosure." "Who made the request?" "I'm not at liberty to reveal names over the phone, but I strongly recommend reviewing your account security. I appreciate the warning." After hanging up, I remained perfectly still. Daniel, or someone working for him, he wasn't just searching public records anymore. He was trying to locate money that legally didn't belong within the court dispute. That meant one thing: he had become impatient. Impatience leads to mistakes. The next morning, Laura Simmons called. "I need you downtown. Is something wrong?" "Not exactly." Her tone suggested otherwise. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. When I entered her office, several documents covered the conference table. She motioned for me to sit. "Have you spoken with anyone from Hamilton Private Bank?" "I received a phone call yesterday." She nodded. "They contacted us afterward. And they were concerned enough to document the incident." I looked at her carefully. "Concerned why?" "Because the individual requesting information attempted to bypass security procedures." I frowned. "That's illegal." "It can be." She slid a printed report across the table. Certain sections had been highlighted. The caller implied he was assisting an elderly client, suffering cognitive decline. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. My stomach tightened. "He used the court petition." Laura nodded apparently. "So before anything has even been decided, he was already trying to gain access." She folded her hands. "Richard?" "Yes?" "This changes the landscape." "How?" If someone connected to your son knowingly misrepresented authority while attempting to obtain protected financial information. She didn't finish, again, she didn't need to. I understood. Daniel wasn't simply fighting aggressively anymore, he was edging dangerously close to crossing legal lines. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about one question: how much did Claire know? She had warned me months earlier, she had whispered, "He won't stop until there's nothing left." Was she trapped, complicit, or afraid? That answer arrived sooner than expected. Just after sunset, headlights appeared outside my house. A silver sedan rolled quietly into the driveway. Claire stepped out alone. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. She glanced nervously up and down the street before knocking. When I opened the door, she spoke almost in a whisper. "Can I come in?" I nodded. She entered quickly. "I can't stay long. Is Daniel with you?" "No." She wrapped both hands around a mug of tea I offered, though she never took a sip. Finally she looked at me. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For everything." I waited. "He thinks you're hiding money." "I know. He hired investigators." That surprised even me. "Investigators?" "They've been looking through property records, business filings, old companies." She swallowed hard. "They've even been trying to contact people from your past." A quiet sadness settled over me, not because of the investigation, because of the desperation driving it. "Claire," she interrupted, "he isn't thinking anymore." "What happened?" "He owes more money than you know." I frowned. "How much?" "I don't know exactly, but it's millions." The word echoed through the room, millions. "He never told you?" "He lied to everyone." She looked toward the window. "The expensive cars, the vacations, the private clubs, they weren't signs of success." Her voice broke. "They were financed with borrowed money." I closed my eyes for a moment. Everything suddenly made sense: the endless urgency, the impossible confidence, the panic hidden beneath expensive suits. Daniel hadn't wanted my retirement because he was ambitious. He needed it because he was drowning. "And the investors?" I asked. "They're not investors anymore." "What are they?" She hesitated. "Creditors." The room fell silent. "They've given him deadlines." "How long?" "A few weeks." I understood then why he'd accelerated everything, why he'd abandoned persuasion for intimidation. He wasn't racing toward wealth, he was running from collapse. Claire reached into her purse. "I shouldn't have this." She placed a folded document on the table. "What is it?" I copied it. I unfolded the pages: a debt summary, corporate guarantees, personal liabilities, wire transfers, the numbers blurred together. Nearly $3 million, secured against businesses that barely existed. My breathing slowed. "This is real." She nodded. I checked. "Why are you giving me this?" Tears filled her eyes. "Because someone has to stop him." I looked at her for a long moment. "Does he know you're here?" "No. If he finds out." "I know." She stood before I could respond. "I have to go, Claire." She stopped at the door. "Thank you." She gave a faint, heartbreaking smile. "No," she whispered, "I'm thanking you." Then she disappeared into the rainy night. I locked the door and returned to the dining table. The debt documents lay in front of me like pieces of a puzzle finally beginning to fit together. Daniel wasn't merely greedy. He was cornered. Cornered people convince themselves that impossible choices are reasonable. They justify betrayal. They rewrite history. They stop seeing family. They only see obstacles. I carefully placed Claire's documents into the folder, marked Daniel. Another piece of evidence, another thread, another truth waiting to surface. As I closed the folder, my phone vibrated with a new email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. It was from one of Daniel's attorneys, and attached to the email was a notice informing me that, effective immediately, they were filing an emergency motion to freeze every domestic account held in my name. Daniel believed he had finally trapped me. He had no idea that while he was fighting over the money he could see, the future of his entire inheritance was about to be decided by the fortunes he still couldn't find. I read the email 3 times before setting my phone face down on the dining room table. The words didn't change. Emergency motion to preserve assets. It was written in the cold, polished language only attorneys seemed capable of using. Every sentence sounded reasonable on the surface. They claimed the court should temporarily freeze my domestic accounts to prevent financial mismanagement, while my competency was being evaluated. To anyone reading it for the first time, it might even have sounded compassionate: protect an elderly man, safeguard his retirement, ensure no one takes advantage of him. The irony was almost laughable. The only person trying to take advantage of me had signed the petition himself. I closed my eyes for a moment. Eleanor used to tell me something whenever I faced a difficult negotiation. The first person who rushes is usually the one who's losing. Daniel was rushing. That meant the pressure on him had become unbearable. I picked up the phone and called Laura. She answered before the second ring. I was expecting your call. You've already seen the filing, about 20 minutes ago. And, I'd actually planned to call you tonight. Her voice remained calm, almost reassuring. They're asking for temporary restrictions, not permanent control. But they'll try to make it permanent. They will. She paused, which is exactly why we're going to let them. I frowned. Excuse me? Meet me tomorrow morning. You'll understand then. The courthouse had always intimidated me. Not because of the judges or lawyers, but because every hallway carried stories of people watching their lives change forever. Laura met me outside courtroom 4 carrying 2 thick binders. You slept? She asked. Poorly, good. I looked at her in confusion. Why is that good? Because anxious people prepare. She smiled faintly. Overconfident people improvise. We entered a private conference room reserved for attorneys. She opened one of the binders. Tell me something. What? Has Daniel ever underestimated you before? I thought about it. When he was 16, he challenged me to rebuild an old motorcycle. Laura looked up. And? He laughed when I said we'd finish it. Did you? 3 months later, what happened? He couldn't believe it ran. She nodded. That's useful. I laughed softly. I'm not sure how. Because people who consistently underestimate someone tend to repeat the mistake. She slid another document toward me. The judge will probably approve a temporary freeze on your domestic accounts. I stared at her. That's terrible. No. She tapped the page. It's exactly what your son expects. I still didn't understand. If he wins that motion, he'll celebrate. So celebrating makes people careless. The hearing itself lasted less than an hour. Daniel sat across the courtroom, wearing an expensive navy suit. From a distance he looked confident, prepared, victorious. He barely glanced in my direction. His attorney argued that recent behavior suggested declining judgment. They pointed to large charitable donations I'd made after Eleanor's death. To withdrawals for home repairs. To gifts I'd given my grandchildren years earlier. Every ordinary financial decision was presented as evidence of instability. Then they introduced Daniel. He walked to the witness stand, without hesitation. I watched my own son raise his right hand and swear to tell the truth. He didn't hesitate once. My father has become increasingly confused. Lie, he frequently forgets conversations. Lie, he believes people are conspiring against him. Lee, he no longer understands the value of money. The biggest lie of all. Laura never interrupted. She simply took notes, page after page. Occasionally she underlined something. Sometimes she circled dates. Once she smiled, a tiny smile. Daniel noticed it. His confidence wavered for barely a second, then it returned. The judge approved a temporary restriction on several domestic accounts, pending further review, exactly as Laura predicted. Daniel looked relieved, almost excited. As we exited the courtroom, he caught up with me in the hallway. I told you this didn't have to happen. I looked at him quietly. Are you happy? I didn't want it to come to this. You filed the petition. You forced my hand. I studied his face. For the first time, I noticed something beneath the confidence. Exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie wasn't perfectly straight. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. He wasn't sleeping. Good. He leaned closer. You've still got time. For what? Sign everything voluntarily. No. His smile disappeared. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. Before he could answer, Laura stepped beside me. We're leaving now. Daniel glared at her. You think you're clever. She smiled professionally. I think I'm patient. Back at her office, Laura closed the conference room door. How did he do? I asked. She laughed. Exceptionally well. I thought he was convincing. He was. Then why are you smiling? She opened her notebook. Because witnesses rarely realize they're building 2 cases at the same time. What do you mean? He wasn't only testifying against you. She pointed toward her notes. He was committing himself to a timeline. I frowned. A timeline? Yes. She turned the notebook toward me. Every statement Daniel had made was listed beside dates. According to his testimony, I'd supposedly been mentally declining for nearly 2 years. Laura looked at me. When did he borrow $80,000 from you? About 18 months ago. And $120,000 before that, a little over a year. She nodded. So according to his own testimony, understanding hit me instantly. If I was mentally incompetent, she finished the sentence, then every financial transaction he accepted during that period becomes legally questionable. I stared at her. He admitted taking money from someone he now claims couldn't make financial decisions. Exactly. A slow smile spread across my face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the balance shifting. Daniel had created a contradiction. And contradictions are dangerous inside a courtroom. 2 days later, Margaret knocked on my door carrying blueberry muffins. I figured you hadn't eaten. She was right. We sat on the back porch watching birds gather near the feeder Eleanor had painted years ago. You know, Margaret said, there's been a black SUV parked down the street. I looked up. How long? 3 days. What do? They watch. My stomach tightened. Anyone get out? Only once. She hesitated. They photographed your house. I wasn't surprised anymore. Daniel's investigators, still searching, still hoping I'd reveal something. Margaret looked at me carefully. Are you frightened? I thought about the question. A month earlier I would have answered yes. Now, no, she smiled. Good, why? Because bullies lose interest when fear disappears. Her words lingered after she left. Fear really had disappeared, not because the danger was gone, because the truth had finally become stronger than the lies. That evening, Laura called again. I've got news. What happened? We subpoenaed Daniel's financial disclosures. And? They're incomplete. Meaning, he failed to disclose several personal guarantees. I remembered Claire's documents. The debt, exactly. Laura's voice grew quieter. We also discovered something else. What? 3 weeks before filing against you. Yes, he attempted to refinance his properties, and he was denied. My heartbeat quickened. So he needed my retirement money. No, Laura corrected gently. He needed it immediately. She paused. Richard, I think we're finally seeing the real motive. I looked toward the study where Eleanor's handwritten note still rested pinned as the brown folder. Daniel wasn't fighting for his future anymore. He was fighting to delay his collapse, and desperate men often make one final mistake. Laura spoke again. We've scheduled depositions. When? Next week. Will Daniel testify again? Yes, and this time. She allowed herself the smallest hint of satisfaction. He won't be controlling the questions. I hung up and looked out at the quiet backyard. For weeks, Daniel had believed he was tightening the noose around me. He never realized that every legal filing, every sworn statement, every desperate move, was slowly tightening one around himself. And waiting quietly in that brown folder upstairs was the one secret that could destroy everything he thought he was about to inherit. The week leading up to the depositions moved with agonizing slowness. Every morning I expected another surprise, another legal notice, another accusation. Instead, there was silence. Laura called only once, reminding me to answer every question honestly and never volunteer information that hadn't been asked. The truth doesn't need embellishment, she said. It's already enough. I appreciated that about her. She never promised victory, she promised preparation. There was a difference. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the marina, where Eleanor and I used to spend summer evenings watching sailboats drift across the water. We had never owned a boat. We simply enjoyed sitting on the old wooden bench with paper cups of coffee, imagining where each vessel might be headed. I hadn't visited since her funeral. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The bench, the pier, even the lighthouse in the distance. Grief had a strange way of changing perspective. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Something told me not to. Mr. Bennett? Yes, my name is Thomas Reed. His voice was measured, careful. I'm a forensic accountant. I see, I believe, we need to speak. About what? Your son. Every muscle in my body tensed. I worked with one of his companies last year, and I resigned. Why? There was a long pause. Because the numbers didn't add up. I remained silent. People often reveal more when you don't interrupt. I wasn't hired to commit fraud, Thomas continued. I was hired to clean up records. What kind of records? Loans. He sighed heavily. Fake invoices, shell companies. Money moving in circles. I stared across the lake. Are you telling me Daniel committed fraud? I'm telling you I refused to sign financial statements that weren't accurate. Why call me now? I saw the court filing. How? It's public. Another pause. I realized what he was trying to do. Can you prove any of this? I kept copies. The words landed like thunder. I wasn't sure I'd ever need them. You still have them. Every email, every spreadsheet, every instruction I received. I closed my eyes. Months earlier, I would have called it impossible. Now it felt inevitable. Would you be willing to speak with my attorney? Yes. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Laura listened to the recording of my conversation twice before speaking. This is significant. Can we use it? If his documents are authentic. She leaned back. They could completely change this case. She immediately arranged a meeting with Thomas for the following morning. By noon, she called again. They're real. You're certain? Painfully. What did he give you? More than I expected. She sounded almost stunned. There are internal emails discussing liquidity problems. I don't understand. They mention your retirement accounts. A knot formed in my stomach. They were planning this for months. I gripped the phone tighter. What exactly do the emails say? They refer to your savings as. She stopped. As what? The backup exit. I felt sick, not because of the money, because somewhere, in a corporate boardroom, my son had reduced my lifetime of work to a line item in his escape plan. Not dad, not father. Just, the backup exit. The deposition took place in a private conference room rather than a courtroom. A court reporter sat quietly near the corner. Laura occupied the chair beside me. Across the table sat Daniel and his legal team. He smiled as if he were attending an ordinary business meeting. That smile faded the moment he noticed several additional binders stacked neatly in front of Laura. His attorney began politely. Mr. Bennett, how would you describe your relationship with your son? I answered honestly. I loved him. Past tense. Daniel noticed. His eyes flickered. When did that change? When he decided my life had become less valuable than my bank accounts. Silence. The attorney continued. Have you experienced memory loss? No. Confusion? No. Difficulty managing finances? No. He asked dozens of questions. Every answer remained consistent. Civil, truthful. Finally, Laura's turn arrived. She stood slowly. Mr. Daniel Bennett. He straightened confidently. You testified last week that your father has been mentally declining for approximately 2 years. Correct. And during those same 2 years, she flipped open a folder. Did you receive funds from him totaling more than $400,000? Daniel hesitated. Those were investments. Please answer yes or no. Yes. Laura nodded. So you willingly accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from a man you now claim lacked financial capacity. Daniel looked toward his attorney. Objection. Discussion. Delay. None of it erased the question. Finally he answered. I believed he had moments of clarity. Laura didn't react. She simply opened another binder. I'd like to mark Exhibit 21. The court reporter accepted the document. Daniel frowned. What is that? Laura smiled politely. An email. She began reading. If Dad refuses, we'll push the competency angle. Once the accounts are frozen, he'll have no choice. The room went completely still. Daniel's face lost all color. His attorney leaned forward. Where did you obtain that? Laura ignored him. She looked directly at Daniel. Did you write this email? He swallowed. Yes or no? I don't remember. Laura slid another document across the table. It contains your digital signature. Another silence, longer this time. Finally. Yes. I watched the confidence drain from my son's face. For the first time since this began, he looked frightened, not angry, not defensive, frightened. Laura wasn't finished. She introduced another email, then another. Each one painted the same picture. This wasn't concern. This wasn't family. This had been a calculated financial strategy. Then came the final exhibit. Claire's copied debt summary. Laura placed it gently in front of Daniel. Would you explain why 3 weeks before our filing against your father, your companies were facing liabilities exceeding $3 million? Daniel stared at the pages. He said nothing. his attorney whispered urgently into his ear. Still nothing. The silence itself became an answer. Laura closed the binder. No further questions. As everyone gathered their papers, Daniel finally looked at me, not with arrogance, not with entitlement, with desperation. "Dad," it was the first time in weeks he'd called me that without demanding anything afterward. I waited. "This isn't what it looks like." I met his eyes. "I know." His shoulders relaxed for an instant, then I quietly finished my sentence. "It's..." He opened his mouth, nothing came out. For years, I had chased after every excuse he ever made, every promise, every apology, every story. Now the stories had run out, facts had replaced them, documents, cyclones, bank records, signed statements. Truth has a remarkable quality, once enough of it gathers in one place. Even the loudest lie begins to sound very small. As I walked toward the conference room door, Laura caught up beside me. She spoke so quietly only I could hear. "Richard." "Yes?" "The judge hasn't seen the most important evidence yet." I looked at her. What could be more important than this? A faint smile crossed her face. "The brown folder." My heartbeat slowed. The offshore assets, the trust, Eleanor's careful planning, the one secret Daniel had spent weeks trying to uncover. He still believed those funds would eventually become his. He had no idea that hidden among those documents was a clause, written years before by Charles Whitmore at Eleanor's insistence, that would determine exactly who inherited every protected dollar. And if Daniel had truly attempted to defraud his own father, that clause would ensure he never received a single cent. For the first time since Daniel had walked into my home, demanding my retirement, I slept through the night. Not because the battle was over, because I finally understood where it was heading. The truth had begun doing what I never could. It was speaking for itself. The morning after the deposition, Laura called before I had even finished breakfast. "Richard, can you come to the office? Has something happened?" "Yes." Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable energy beneath it. "I think it's time to open the brown folder." I looked toward the study upstairs. For years, that folder had represented nothing more than careful planning between Eleanor and me. Now it had become the final piece of a puzzle neither Daniel nor his attorneys even knew existed. "I'll be there in an hour." Laura was waiting in the conference room when I arrived. The folder sat in the middle of the table exactly where I had placed it. She didn't touch it. Instead, she looked at me. "Before we open it, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "When was the last time you actually read these documents?" I thought for a moment. "The week after Eleanor's funeral." "So, almost 8 years." I nodded. Laura carefully opened the folder. Every document was still perfectly organized. Charles Whitmore had always been meticulous. Trust agreements, investment schedules, letters of instruction, tax confirmations, nothing unusual, until Laura reached the final sealed envelope. Across the front, in Charles's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words, "To be opened only if necessary." Laura raised an eyebrow. "I assume you've never opened this." I honestly forgot it was there. She slid the envelope toward me. "It belongs to you." My hands felt strangely heavy as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, not from Charles, from Eleanor. Her handwriting immediately brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, then the future we hoped would never come has arrived. Charles insisted I write this after we completed our estate planning," he said. The strongest legal documents are often supported by the clearest intentions. If Daniel is standing beside you with love in his heart, then I hope this letter is never needed, but if he ever values money more than family, then promise me you won't confuse forgiveness with surrender. I stopped reading. Laura quietly looked away, giving me a moment. After several deep breaths, I continued. "You spent your entire life protecting us. Now it's time to protect yourself. Remember what we agreed. No inheritance should ever reward betrayal. Love should always be unconditional. Money never should be." My vision blurred. Eleanor knew, years before any of this happened. She had somehow imagined this exact possibility. Beneath her letter was another document. Laura carefully unfolded it, her eyes widened. "This," she read another page, "is extraordinary." "What is it?" She turned the document toward me. It was an amendment to our international trust, signed, notarized, perfectly valid. One paragraph had been highlighted by Charles. "Any beneficiary who knowingly attempts to obtain trust assets through fraud, coercion, financial abuse, or intentional misrepresentation against either grantor shall be deemed to have voluntarily forfeited all beneficial interest in the trust. I read it twice, the third time, finally, I whispered. So if Daniel, Laura finished the sentence. If the court determines he intentionally used fraud or financial abuse against you, he loses everything. She nodded. Every protected asset. I leaned back slowly. All those years ago, I had believed the trust existed only to protect our savings. I hadn't realized Eleanor had also protected our principles. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. By now the case had attracted local media, not because of the money, because allegations of elder financial abuse, involving a successful businessman, had become public. Daniel looked completely different. The expensive confidence was gone. His suit hung loosely across tired shoulders, his eyes were hollow, his attorney requested a private settlement before proceedings began. Laura didn't even hesitate. We decline. The judge entered, everyone stood. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way television portrays courtrooms. No shouting, no surprise witnesses bursting through doors, just facts, one after another, AMOMs, bank records, debt summaries, sworn statements, testimony from Thomas Reed, evidence from Hamilton Private Bank regarding unauthorized inquiries, Claire's testimony describing months of financial pressure, Margaret's testimony confirming I had shown no signs of cognitive decline. Finally, Laura presented the trust amendment. Daniel's attorney objected immediately. The trust isn't relevant. Laura calmly responded. It becomes relevant if fraud is established. The judge allowed it. I watched Daniel read the highlighted paragraph. His face turned pale. For the first time since this began, he finally understood. He hadn't been fighting for an inheritance, he had been destroying it. The judge spoke quietly. This court finds no credible evidence that Richard Bennett lacks the capacity to manage his financial affairs. My shoulders relaxed. The evidence instead demonstrates a deliberate effort to pressure and manipulate the petitioner for financial gain. Daniel lowered his head, the judge continued. Furthermore, multiple sworn statements presented by Mr. Daniel Bennett are directly contradicted by documentary evidence. Silence filled the courtroom. Accordingly, he paused. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. One sentence, months of fear disappeared. But the judge wasn't finished. He referred portions of the evidence to prosecutors for review, regarding possible perjury, and attempted financial exploitation. Daniel closed his eyes. His attorney slowly placed a hand on his shoulder. There was nothing left to argue. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded everyone. Laura guided me away before they reached us. As we crossed the parking lot, I heard someone call my name. Dad. I turned. Daniel stood alone. For the first time in years, there were no lawyers beside him, no expensive watch, no confident smile, just a tired man who looked much older than his age. I'm sorry, the words were barely audible. I looked at him for a long moment. I believe you. His eyes filled with hope, then I gently continued. But believing you're sorry doesn't erase what you chose to do. He looked down. I've lost everything. I nodded. I know, I never thought, I know. There was nothing left to say. Some wounds heal, some simply become lessons. I walked away. He didn't follow. A month later, I returned to the cemetery carrying fresh white lilies. I sat beside Eleanor's grave exactly as I had hundreds of times before. We did it. The wind moved softly through the trees. You were right. I smiled. I suppose that shouldn't surprise me anymore. I told her everything, about the courtroom, about Laura, about Claire beginning divorce proceedings, about Margaret insisting I join her gardening club because, according to her, retirement shouldn't include so many lawyers. For the first time in years, I laughed without forcing it. Before leaving, I placed my hand gently on the cool granite. I couldn't save our son from becoming the man he chose to be. I paused. But I did save what we spent our lives building. As I walked back toward my car, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. I finally understood something Eleanor had tried to teach me long ago. Love is measured by what we willingly give. Character is measured by what we refuse to take, and in the end, my son didn't lose his inheritance because I took it away. He lost it the moment he decided that greed was worth more than the father who had spent a lifetime earning it.